seeing what it would be like if we couldn't, if we can't get toilet paper, if we can't get drinking water, if we're not able to go sit down with our friends and enjoy their company at a restaurant. And buddy, I'm blessed with, again, my parents here. I'm blessed with great genetics. Everybody on my dad's side was tall and thin. Everybody on my mom's side was kind of small. So I can eat like a hog, and I don't gain any weight.
We love to eat. We love to eat, don't we? I see you at many restaurants, yeah. Ronnie Johnson, many restaurants.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We love to eat. We love the companionship, of sitting down and having a meal and being able to talk about our race or the next race or whatever. And so now, but, there again, it's like this virus came up. We started hearing about it. And we're like, does this really exist? I mean, I hadn't seen it. Well, honestly, I still haven't seen it. I'm sure that I will.
Right.
But it's out there. It's just like another, the most powerful thing there is, you talked about being spiritual is, we don't see it, but we know it's there.
Absolutely. That's right.
So, and so I've kind of looked at this deal like that. You see, with both, you see the effects and the things, but, coronavirus hadn't walked up and introduced itself to me, but I believe it's there.
And I had somebody, and Mike, I know we'll comment on this because you were at North Georgia. I was at North Georgia, and then Cochrane the following weekend, and this was Friday the 13th to the 14th and the 15th of March. And mind you, this was about 1 or 2 days after this had begun. And I had somebody just comment on my Facebook wall, and they called me out, and they're like, well, hey, you're talking about everybody being home in quarantine now, but, weren't you at Cochrane? Weren't you at North Georgia a couple of weeks ago? Well, first off, and I will say this publicly, Ronnie, you were there. Mike, you were there. Kenny Slayton was there. Many others were there. There was no mandate stating for people not to be gathered in large crowds at that time. During that weekend, there was no mandate. There was no mandate at North Georgia. There was no mandate at Cochrane. Had there had been a mandate, I believe we all would have done the right thing, Ronnie, and would have followed the rules and not showed up.
Well, yeah, and it's still, something like this is, nobody's seen this. It's hard to accept it, and it's hard to react to it. My wife and I were out last Saturday.
Right.
And we'd been somewhere, and we're like, hey, let's go to McDonald's. I think we got to go through the drive-through, but let's go to McDonald's. I got a craving for some salty French fries. I like to eat. So we pull in there, and she's like, can you still go inside and order? I'm like, yeah, I think you can still go in there and eat.
Right.
And so we go inside, and you could order, but you couldn't dine in. I'd walk right by the sign that plainly stated that.
Right.
But we got in there, and we ordered our food, so we go back out in the car, and we're sitting there eating. And we're 64, both of us.
Right.
She might be 63. Anyway, but this other couple pulls up, and they got to be in their 80s, if not 90. They pull up, they get out. This little old guy, it's all he can do to shuffle in the store. I see him go in there. And I see the lady trying to sit down. I see the young manager come over, and he pulls a chair out and seats her. But I can see him explaining to her, and I know what he's telling her. And so I tell my wife, I said, ain't this something? You live to be 85, 90 years old, and
right.
You ain't never seen nothing like this.
Right.
So we haven't. None of us have.
No.
And so it's just a hand we've been dealt, and but people are losing their jobs, it's not just a,
it's not just a virus. It's not just a virus.
It's not just a health issue.
Right.
It's a financial issue.
Yes.
It's going to be a mental issue. but we just got to deal with it.
For sure, definitely. Hey, let's get off the talk about coronavirus and all that other stuff. That's not why we have the legend that is the Chattanooga Flash, Ronnie Johnson, on, but I did want to get your thoughts on this. Well, let's go back to racing talk. Why is racing so different? Well, okay, let me rephrase that question. How do you feel about racing back in your 70s, 80s to what it is here in the 2020s?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of changes, and for a person like myself that's raced for a long time, the cars continue to evolve. The technology evolves,
right?
And the cars themselves continue to evolve. And one of my dearest friends and idols is C.J. Rayburn. So I heard a podcast the other day, and Rayburn's saying that the cars aren't going any faster. C.J., I'm sorry, I disagree.
Right.
We're going through the corners faster now than we've ever, like on a slick track. Okay, so maybe the lap times don't indicate every week that we're going faster, but it's so easy for a guy like myself to go out here and race and say go out in hot laps or whatever and come in and say, hey, car feels pretty good. But that's because it feels better than the car we ran last year or the year before or whatever, because it's all evolved. But what I feel may not be good enough, but so I get in trouble for that. And it seems that you need to be so aggressive now. And the cars are so much alike, that you got to drive them, man. You just really got to drive them hard. And I love a slow, smooth, slick racetrack. I mean, I loved it. I mean, the first handful of races I went to in 1973 and drove, man, I tore my car up. I had somebody looking for me after the race. They were mad. I'd run them over. So I was too aggressive. I wanted to. The difference then to now, for me personally, is I used to want to see how fast I could go. We over the years we've broke track records and maybe we'll break some more. But I used to want to do that. I wanted to see how fast I could go. Well, now I want to see how well I can finish. I don't necessarily have to go fast, but even on the slower and slicker tracks now, man, you got to get after it. And you're out there with 602s and 604s and that. Everybody's got the same motor for pretty much. You gotta drive it. You gotta find somewhere on the racetrack. You gotta race hard, but technically, I've always, man, I don't just drive. I love working on these things. I love building them. I'm not real big, I've never really been a big, engine guy or engine tuner guy. If that thing's on 8 cylinders and it's running cool, I'm probably going to leave the hood on it, at the racetrack. But I want to work on the chassis. I want to work on the tires. I want to, so a couple of things that I miss from the 70s and 80s to now is the fact that then you could lay awake at night and you could think about doing something to your car that nobody else is doing. Or you could think about using a different tire than anybody else had. You can't do that now because we all got, we got so many rules and there's a reason for them. But as we've heard, especially since I think it was the 2015 season where Davenport and Rumley had the device. Now we're working in such a smaller box, and it's just really hard to get an edge. I can't go to a crate racing USA race and put on a different tire from anybody else because you're only allowed 2, and I can still do that from time to time. And I don't know how many times over the years that I've been a hero and I've been a zero because, I've I've gambled, on those tires. But I can tell you that I think my times of being a hero were greater than my times of being a zero because of that. And, I used to could get out there and change a suspension, build something else. And some of these things, I've learned those habits from some of my heroes and idols that I've watched, growing up, back in the mid '70s. One of them was Doug Kennemer, one of the North Georgia racers. This guy'd show up, and I'd only see him 4 or 5 times a year. Every time I saw him, he had something different. I'd look at his car. He had a different, we might have had leaf springs on our cars then, but if everybody had Camaro leaf springs, Doug would have Chrysler leaf springs. He would do things different, and I always admired him for that because he was successful. He would have been successful in my car, but he was more successful because he did his own thing. He was innovative. He was an individual. Those are guys that technically have been heroes. And I talked about Rayburn earlier. And then as far as drivers, when I was growing up, of course, my dad was my hero. Watching, I'd go. Boys used to be paved, and and there was a time where my dad mostly ran pavement races.
Right.
So before I started racing, I saw a lot of pavement racing, but used to go when I got a driver's license. And again, everybody else would have been already racing. Now, guys and gals are racing 2 years before they get a driver's license. But when I got my driver's license, I'd drive to Rome, Georgia on Sunday night and watch the races because I'd see 8 or 10 guys there that had won a main event somewhere the night before, somewhere in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina. They'd show up at Rome.
Right.
And I'd see these guys race, and I'd watch Buck Simmons and Leon Sells and Doug Kennemer, Charlie Mincy and Jody Ridley and Snooks DeFore, Leon Brindle. I'd watch all these guys, and Bud Lunsford and Buck Simmons, Leon, Charlie Mincy, those guys were so smooth. At the end of the race, they were still running. Their cars weren't bent. And those are the guys I wanted to be. I'm like, that's the way to do it right there. I'd watch Buck, and I raced with Buck. Later I raced with Buck. Buck would stalk you for 99 laps and pass you on the last lap. You'd make a mistake because this guy's just sitting there taking care of his stuff.
Oh.
And you're racing for all it's worth. And when it got time to go, you'd go. So, those are the guys that I admired as far as their driving. And, and again, I've gotten to race my dirt car some on pavement over the years.
Yeah.
And, it's a different, I don't know, you just got to have a different agenda or whatever. And so now, but I find myself now not being aggressive enough a lot, especially early on for qualifying and that. And, I don't know, at the times you're like, hey, did you see Ronnie? He started 16th. And, man, I believe if he'd had a few more laps, he'd have been top 3 or he might have won or whatever. But I find myself struggling with that now because I've worked on my cars. I've raced my own cars out of my own pocket. And so I try to take care of them. I'm out there and I'm like, I drive for guys and they're, I can just see them. They're disappointed at times, like early on in the night. I'm like, man, I don't want to tear your stuff up. And, I don't want to tear it up. I don't want us in here trying to put a new right front spindle in that on it after qualifying.
Right.
So we can run the feature. But
for sure.
those, it's took me 15 minutes to tell you. But those are the things that have changed from the 70s and 80s.
You need to, Mike Garrett, I'm going to let you ask a couple of questions here because poor Mike has been in the background just kind of not being able to say anything. But this is what I love about you, Ronnie. You can literally, when it's all said and done, when you retire from race car announcing, from driving, you could be an announcer. You could have a Ronnie Johnson podcast. You could do it.
Well, if we don't